maybe about 5 years ago now it's been. Leilani and myself are avid runners, and we're always in the woods walking and riding bikes and running. And one day we were running in the woods, and everything was right. The season was right, the temperature, the rainfall, and we literally saw, it seemed like hundreds, not only of the same mushrooms, but different mushrooms and different colors and shapes. And it was actually quite amazing, because I'm sure they had been there for quite some time, but I don't believe I've ever seen them before. And of course the question was asked, are these edible? What is edible? And of course you don't have any idea. And so I told her, I said, well, surely some of them have to be, and we just need to go ahead and pursue, a professional and some books and figure out, what we can eat and what we can't. And from there on, Leilani pursued.
I went to the public library and I asked for a book on mushrooms, and the librarian went in the back and she came out and she goes, we have one book, it's Mushrooms of Mississippi, but you can't check it out, it's a reference book. So I took out my old cell phone, which was a flip phone, and I proceeded to look in the book, and luckily the author had his phone number in there. So I called the author, and Mr. George Dukes was not at home, so I left him a message. So by the time I made it home, he left me a message. So when I called him, he said, give me your address, I'd love to send you a book. So he asked me what county we were in, and I told him Pearl River. He goes, well, I'm up here in Puckett, Mississippi. He goes, it's probably 2 hours. He goes, why don't you and Tony just come up to my farm, because my wife has an incurable brain disease, and I'll take you into my woods. I said, are you serious? And this was in July. He goes, sure. So we went up, and this is where our life totally changed, and we've never looked back. He sent us home with 2.5 pounds of wild edible chanterelles. They're the most choice mushroom in the summer in Mississippi. And we came home, all the children and grandchildren were on vacation. They came home 2 days later. We took the 2 youngest children and the granddaughters back to Mr. George, because he shroomed us, and we said, well, we'll just let him shroom them too. And unfortunately, Mr. George has passed in 2014, but when we met him in 2011, he asked Tony and I to do 2 things: remain observant when we're in nature, but also to educate Mississippians about what's lying at their feet across all the bottom hardwoods across the state of Mississippi, the treasure trove.
Well, our property here consists of 160 acres. We have a 12-acre lake in the front. We have 2 small ponds in the northern part of the property. Our land borders Habolo-Chittle Creek, so we have about 4,000 feet of creek frontage. The majority of the land is hardwood bottoms, which are obviously ideal for what we're doing, which is foraging for wild mushrooms. We do have some areas that have the loblolly and slash pine. We do have a little bit of longleaf pine, and one part of the property we are avidly trying to do longleaf restoration. And we practice sustainable agriculture, and we try to tend the ground with a very light hand to encourage all the pollinators and reptiles and different things to cohabitate together and keep everything as natural and clean as we can. Just for everything's well-being, whether it be for nature itself and for us, for foragers. So the first step of the production of the gourmet mushrooms is, primarily we do a lot of production on wheat straw. And so I'll get a round bale wheat straw, I'll pasteurize that, and then I inoculate that with the inoculum of the mushroom that I'm choosing to grow. There's several ways to go about that. Initially, to get started, you will buy your spawn or your cultures from a spawn library or a culture library, and that's how you'll get started. We have an in-house lab. I built an in-house lab so that I can do my own mycelium, which is financially cheaper to do it that way. And so we actually, once we have our mushrooms that we decide that we're going to grow, I can keep cultivating that or keep expanding that through the mycelium in the lab and store that in the refrigerator for long periods of time, and then that's how we propagate that. We also have the ability to take certain wild mushrooms that we deem are really good gourmet mushrooms and culture those through spore prints and through tissue culture, through agar, and do that process of moving to grain and then slowly to the fruiting substrate. The fruiting substrates are going to be wheat straw, log inoculation, and then sawdust and wood chip blocks. And that's primarily the three avenues that we pursue.
We like to take children and parents and grandparents out and teach them proper identification rules, because that's imperative in knowing known lookalikes. We mainly focus on truly just your known wild edibles and pretty much stay away from everything else. Teaching proper scientific names are very important, even though common names, or what would you call it if you were able to name it, because that's how all mushrooms were named, is fun, but because of region to region and places in the state, the names can change. Scientific names are very important. Actually, one of the most important things is carrying a hand lens, because if you miss key components, you can actually misidentify fungi. Carry in a basket with you, blunt tip scissors, because you have to do proper harvesting of your fungi, which means we pretty much leave 20% behind. That way it can continue sporulating and running the mycelium. And you have to be careful how you harvest them. They have a lot of issues still in the scientific world of what is proper. Cutting them, pulling them, they're unsure. So for us, we just cut ours off as down to the ground as close as possible. But we do want to understand what are the mushrooms growing on, because that's key component. Sometimes you think it's growing on the ground, but it's actually growing on wood, and that can change everything, whether the mushroom is edible or not. And dropping a spore print. And the most important thing, when in doubt, always throw it out. It's just not worth it. The cultivation basics are, we have an in-house lab where we grow out our own mycelium and agar and stuff. Then we have a grow room going up, but people can come and take a cultivation class and inoculate their own logs for their shiitakes. They can inoculate straw. They can buy grain spawn, which they can then inoculate spent coffee grounds and also trash, as long as it's not gloss. And those are just classes we like to do in 4 to 6. We actually like to do everything in 4 to 6 because it just makes it a more unique and memorable experience. What we like all visitors to leave with is to remember, when you do go out into the natural world, to stop, look up, look around, reach down, put your hands in the soil. Just know that one day we all will part from the place we call home, but we really should be leaving it better, if we can, than what we found it. And if not, at least take care of the way we found it. And for all farm owners, it is important to us, whether we're in season or not, opened or closed, that everything here on the farm stays in tip-top shape, because you never know who has time to pass through and may want to make a visit. And it's easier to keep up your property and your land than to try to rush around and get it in shape, because that is why people are literally paying you to come and visit. So you may as well let them know that you were expecting them as guests.